Plenty to get to on today's San Francisco 49ers report, but before we start, we want that 100,000 subscriber plaque, and I think that we can get there during our watch party against the Bengals right here on the show on Sunday. As you can see with the figures here to my right, we are 2,096 people away from 100,000 subscribers. If you want Niners shows every single day that feature news as well as opinions and analysis, but also the best audience interaction, this is the standard for Niners Talk right here on YouTube, so make sure you hit that subscribe button. As for what we're getting into on today's show, a news alert here on the injury front for the Niners. Brock Purdy back on the practice field. What capacity? We'll talk about that here in just a moment. Also, according to some NFL insiders, San Francisco, a sneaky team to monitor going into Tuesday's NFL trade deadline. And is Kyle Shanahan making Steve Wilks, the Niners defensive coordinator, a scapegoat? We'll also talk about that juicy story at the tail end of the program. Let's start off here with the latest around Brock Purdy, though. Continues to progress through the NFL's concussion protocol. He was on the practice field in the shadows of Levi's Stadium at the SAP Performance Center for practice on Thursday. He was in a helmet, in some shoulder pads. The videos that we saw, he was doing some quarterback rollout drills, and he was throwing the football. This is a sign that Purdy is progressing through that protocol. It is a 5-step plan that we'll dive into here in just a moment, but this is a picture of Brock Purdy just moments ago on the practice field. And I think that it is a positive sign that he's throwing the ball and he's on the field practicing, getting in some of those reps as compared to him being on the sideline. Of note, when a Niners quarterback sometimes wears that black practice jersey, that is a non-contact jersey so that players know that that player is dealing with something. Now, I also want to pass along this from Dr. Nirav Pandya. Hopefully I pronounced that right. If I didn't, I apologize. But he's very well known in the Bay Area. You can give him a follow on Twitter. Has all types of injury updates on the Warriors, on the Niners, on the San Francisco Giants, because he is Bay Area based. And it's a good person to turn to because I'm not a doctor, I'm a broadcaster, I'm a host of the Niners Report. So here's what he had to say. Based on the NFL concussion protocol, this would appear to be step 4 of 5. Step 4 is participation in non-contact training drills during this phase. Neurobalance testing has to return to baseline before heading to step 5, which is clearance for contact. This would typically mean that Purdy has cleared through steps 1 through 3 without symptoms. So that last line, I think, is really important as it pertains to Purdy's injury. As for all 5 of those steps, this is what I can bring you because I have to inform you. So I'm not a doctor, but you still win at the end of the day. Step 1, symptom-limited activity. In this phase, players are asked not to engage in much activity. So that's step number 1 of the NFL's concussion protocol. Step number 2 is aerobic exercise. You go for a run, you go for a jog, you run on the side field, you run on the treadmill, stuff like that. Step 3, football-specific exercise. So Purdy was on the field for walkthroughs yesterday at the early portion of practice, and today doing some of those light rollouts and light quarterbacking type of practice drills at the SAP Performance Center. And then step 4, the club-based non-contact training drills. That looks as though that's what he's doing today. And then the following step that Purdy would have to pass through without symptoms, which is the most important element of this, full football activity and clearance. So with all of that, I think we can summarize it all by saying going into Sunday's game against the Bengals, Fred Warner called it a must-win. I think it's as close to a must-win game as you can get just because you can't fall 3 straight times going into the bye week, and you want Purdy to play if he can. To kind of flush what happened the last 2 weeks, Purdy could receive full clearance on Friday or Saturday. If that happens, he will be this team's starting quarterback, and Sam Darnold will remain as the backup. And going up against this Bengals team, it's going to be a pretty difficult test. They were bad to start the year. They've progressed. They've started to play a little bit better. And like the Browns 2 weeks ago, coming off the bye, Bengals also have the rest advantage over the Niners. They're coming off the bye as well. Offensively, they've really struggled to find their groove because Burrow has been dealing with that calf injury that's really been lingering since training camp. They are 28th in points per game, so the offense hasn't been able to find its stride, which is surprising because Jamar Chase and T. Higgins are so good. They're 4th in yards per play, 32nd in yards per play, So 4 yards per play is what I meant to say is awful. They're 32nd in yards per game. So statistically, this is one of the worst offenses in the game right now. Red zone percentage, they're only scoring touchdowns at just shy of a 54% clip. That's middle of the pack, 17th in the NFL. And then touchdowns per game, also bottom portion of the league at under 2 touchdowns scored per game. Defensively, usually they're a really good unit. Their defensive coordinator, Lou Amarillo, he's had some head coaching opportunities and interviews so far throughout his career, but the defense this year giving up 21-plus points per game, that's 17th in the NFL. 355-plus yards, that's 27th. Yards per play coming in at 24th. Red zone percentage, they put the clamps down. 9th, that's pretty solid, so teams are only scoring a touchdown when they get inside the 20 at about a 48% clip. And then touchdowns per game, middle of the league at number 13. And for Purdy, look, I know that he was bad against the Cleveland Browns, and how he finished the game against Minnesota leads a lot of people to believe that he didn't play well in that loss either on the road. First 3 quarters, I thought Purdy was really good. And on yesterday's show, we talked about the specific play that may have led to Purdy's concussion. That was the brotherly shove, tush-push quarterback sneak formation in which he got the line to gain and then took that massive hit in the head from Jordan Hicks. After the game, Brock Purdy kind of self-reported those concussion symptoms on the plane back to the Bay Area. But after that specific play, that's when Purdy played his worst football from a attempts to completion perspective, but also he threw those 2 touchdowns the final 2 drives, and it would make sense maybe if the concussion happened before that, and that's what derailed his play. But up to this point, he's completing about 68% of his passes. That's really good. 11 touchdowns, 3 picks. That's a good touchdown to interception ratio. Yards per attempt among the top 10 quarterbacks in the NFL at 9.1, and then 238 yards per game in what is a run-heavy offense. With that, I ask you this. Do you think the Niners are going to beat the Bengals? If so, I want you to hit that thumbs up icon and like the video. If not, I want you to comment why and share your football intellect with us. So on the show today, we talk about Brock Purdy here. He practiced today. That's a good sign. We're only getting started. So stay tuned and do not go anywhere because the Niners, according to NFL insiders, a sneaky team to monitor. And Kyle Shanahan with some interesting things to say about Steve Wilks. Did he throw his defensive coordinator under the bus? First, Prize Picks, our sponsor for today's episode, the largest independently run daily fantasy sports app in North America, and you can get up to a $100 deposit match at prizepicks.com/CLNS, code CLNS for that deal to apply. Producer Chip and I, we love their more or less game. You pick 2 or more players, you go more or less on their projected stat lines, and you can have a lot of fun with it. My picks for some NBA action tonight on this Thursday. Sometimes they run some of these deals. How about this one right here? Damian Lillard, more than 18.5 points. That's easy money making his Bucks debut. I also like Tyrese Maxey playing Milwaukee at more than 22.5 points. And then Gabe Vincent season opener against the Denver Nuggets. Rematch of what was that Western Conference Finals matchup. He scored 6 points in 22 minutes. With LeBron James on this minute count, I think that Gabe Vincent gets the same amount of time, but ends up scoring 7 or more points. And if all 3 of those hit, you can win a lot of money. So it's easy and exciting daily fantasy. Head to prizepicks.com/CLNS, code CLNS. If you want to play alongside some of Prize Picks' favorite players like myself, Jay Senior, producer Chip, rapper Meek Mill, and comedian Andrew Schultz, you came to the right app right here, the only app that you should be using for DFS. Next story we want to talk about here. Sneaky team. Could San Francisco make another trade going into Tuesday's NFL trade deadline coming at you on Halloween? What are you wearing for Halloween, by the way? Let me know down in the comments section here. I'll be here working, so I probably won't be wearing anything. Jeremy Fowler with this. In addition to the New Orleans Saints, also watch out for San Francisco as a sneaky team which needs slot corner help. And when we hone in specifically on slot corner, I think that slot corner is a position of need. Now, ideally, I'd go outside corner, but the price to pay for an outside corner is a lot more expensive and expansive as compared to a slot because it's not as valuable of a position in the slot as compared to the outside. Ideally, you go big fish hunting, right? You go after Patrick Surtain. You put him and Charvarius Mooney-Ward on the outside. You have Diamador Lenore on the inside. And I think that's a really good secondary. But there are some solid slot options that you could target that could bolster the secondary a little bit. And I was wrong on Isaiah Oliver. Thought he was going to be a really good pickup. He has not been up to this point. And that's why San Francisco could be looking into that position and doing some intel research on some slot nickel corners. Then there's this from Dan Graziano, also an ESPN NFL insider, just like Jeremy Fowler is. San Francisco is going to be my answer here in regards to the team with sneaky trade deadline intrigue. We're a year removed from them swinging that massive deal for Christian McCaffrey, and the Niners are a team that I think perceives itself as in a somewhat narrow win-now window. No one in the league is getting more production for less money at quarterback, and they will confront some big money roster decisions next offseason. We just saw the Eagles make a rich-get-richer move in their secondary trading for Kevin Byard. When the team that kept you out of the Super Bowl last year is making moves, you have to be thinking about what you can do to counter. And the Philadelphia Eagles, a very aggressive team. Howie Roseman, I think, is the best general manager in the game. And I think with the way that the Niners operate as an organization, they're also one of the most well-run organizations in the game. NFC Championship games in 3 of the last 4 years. They've won a lot of ball games. They've made deep playoff runs. And right now, they're primed for another deep run. And they are a Super Bowl contending team in this league. And I think when you look at the NFL right now, I understand San Francisco has dropped 2 games in a row. I think the top 3 teams, Philadelphia Eagles, Kansas City Chiefs, San Francisco 49ers. So if the Eagles are going out there and they could make another move to bolster their roster and address weaknesses, I do think it's important for San Francisco to counter that because I think these 2 teams, once again like last year, on a collision course to meet in the NFC Championship game. And if the Eagles' moves push them over the top and make them a better roster and the Niners stand pat, you have the Niners front office to blame if they do go down to a team like Philadelphia. You got to go all in this year. Worry about next year. Focus on the present. That's how you have to operate in what is a very uber-aggressive business that the NFL is. And San Francisco has so much talent everywhere. And Dan Graziano made some good points, like they're going to have to confront some difficult financial issues. Do you cut a George Kittle soon? Do you cut a Kyle Juszczyk? What do you do down the road with the player who's aging like Trent Williams, who's making some of the most money among all left tackles in the game? That's a reality. But a reality is also the fact that the Niners are a team that can win a Super Bowl this year. You have the most cap space in the National Football League. Go all in and get on that quest for 6 and be serious about it. So what say you? Before we go to Steve Wilks, the Niners are the blank best team in the NFC. Fill in the blank for me. I think they're number 2. Eagles, Niners, everybody else after that. That's why I think San Francisco should get aggressive in trying to upgrade this roster. Are coaches beefing on this Niners coaching staff? We finalized the show with that. Kyle Shanahan with some interesting remarks about Steve Wilks. And in case you don't know about it, this has everything to do with the Niners' game plan defensively on Monday Night Football against the Minnesota Vikings, how bad this team was on 3rd downs, how Kirk Cousins repeatedly picked them apart, but some of the play calls from defensive coordinator Steve Wilks. So let's set the foundation here. Steve Wilks, at the end of the first half, when Minnesota was in its own territory, called an all-out blitz, which led to the Jordan Addison 60-yard touchdown. That play was critical at that juncture of the football game because San Francisco on the first drive after intercepting Kirk Cousins drove down the field. They're inside the 10. Christian McCaffrey fumble. Vikings respond with an 89-yard touchdown drive all throughout that first half. You were battling adversity, trying to get ahead. And San Francisco at the end of the first half, they had the momentum on their side. Christian McCaffrey with that touchdown catch from Brock Purdy, and they get the ball after halftime. So you score that touchdown before the break. You get the ball to start the third quarter. You score a touchdown there, you're feeling really good about yourselves. But after the McCaffrey touchdown, all-out blitz in a situation and in a spot, both in the game when it comes down to that specific play, but also where the Vikings were on the field, calling an all-out blitz probably isn't the best play call to call there. Now, a lot of you might counter by saying, well, Mooney Ward should have had that interception. Jordan Addison took the ball away from him. Yes, but no safety help on a situation like that on a 3rd and long, all-out blitz when the opponent is backed up deep into their own territory. Look, from a football fundamental standpoint, it's not a good play call there. Kyle Shanahan was asked about that play call after the game because that was a huge turning point in that ball game. And he said he was going to talk to Steve Wilks about the call. He didn't like the result. And then on Wednesday, Shanahan once again pressed by it. And he said, quote, Wilks knows that he messed up that call. Now, for him to say that, I think it's a little bit blunt, but Steve Wilks did mess up the call, and this is an accountability results-driven industry, so I can see where Shanahan is coming from. The full quote from Shanahan. He knows he messed up on that call. I have no problem with 0 blitzes, especially when you need a lot of yards. If you need to get 20 yards to kick a field goal, I have no problem with the 0 blitz. But I do when there are 16 seconds left. That's where he lost track. There was no necessary need for that just because of the time. I have no problem with that play call. But when it's that time, you can't do that. Now, if I'm Steve Wilks, I'd most likely want my boss to not be as direct as Kyle Shanahan was. And this would kind of be my reaction. I'm like, shit, he really called me out, man. This kind of looks like one of those emojis where you see the fire beneath Steve Wilks and it's just like rising and you're like, oh shit, man. But there's also this, and Rob Stats Guerrera, he's doing a great job with his own podcast network covering San Francisco. Give him a follow at Stats on Fire. Getting some good guests on his show too. How crazy was Steve Wilks' blitz at the end of Monday's first half that resulted in a 60-yard touchdown for Minnesota? Per Next Gen Stats, it was the first 7-man pass rush in the last 30 seconds of a half in opposing territory since 2020. So that's what Kyle Shanahan is talking about. Like, he has no problem with the call, but the time and the situation, you should probably be calling something different. And again, Shanahan a little bit direct there. I also think like we're overreacting a little bit to this entire situation because people are like, well, Kyle Shanahan, you could have overridden that call from Steve Wilks because you're the head coach of the football team. You don't know what Kyle Shanahan is doing at that moment. He could be going over plays with Brock Purdy on the sideline. He could be communicating with other coaches as far as the game plan, the tactics in his headset. He might not be hearing Steve Wilks make that call, and he also has other things to do outside of knowing what Steve Wilks is going to call. Also, maybe he's put his trust into his defensive coordinator after having 2 pretty damn good ones in years prior in Robert Saleh and DeMeco Ryans to make the right call there. And Shanahan, some people are saying, your offense can do a little bit better. There's no doubt about that. Both things can be true. Niners offense has struggled in back-to-back weeks, and this was an awful game from this Niners defense against Minnesota, and they got carved up by the Vikings. And for everybody to say, fire Steve Wilks right now, I mean, going into the Vikings game, nobody was talking about that. One bad outing shouldn't change that, especially in a place where you haven't won in more than 3 decades, because for whatever reason, San Francisco can't win on the road in Minneapolis. But going into the Minnesota game, the Niners were first in scoring points per game allowed at 14.5. Nobody was complaining about Steve Wilks then. They were first in interceptions, third in yards per game, fifth in rushing yards per game, and third in the NFL in quarterback pressures. Now, probably Shanahan and Steve Wilks had a couple of conversations. Maybe things got heated. Both coaches can be better. It's not the end of the world that this defense had one bad outing in this game, but if it continues, obviously that is going to be an issue. So, did Kyle Shanahan throw Steve Wilks under the bus? I think it's one of those things where, like, yeah, too direct, maybe he did a little bit, but also Steve Wilks has to take accountability for making the wrong call there. Give me a Y for yes or an N for no. Appreciate everybody for tuning into the show today. Don't forget to subscribe. Let's get the plaque.